What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, November 15th, 2018. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. In fact, the talking points list is just really, really loaded up. So I'm going to ask all of you listeners if you have something to contribute to the topic at hand, please go ahead and call on in. But if you just want to chit chat, let's put that on hold here because there is a lot going on here today. Some days are easier to do this show than others. It all depends on how much is going on in the world. And it's a sad irony because there's a part of me that wants everything in the world to calm down, for there to be peace and calm and civility. But if that were to happen, I'd be out of a job because I couldn't fill 3 hours worth of radio. So it's kind of a little bit of a conflict going on there. All right, so let's turn down to the Sturm und Drang down in Florida. As of the last update, Rick Scott has a 12,000 vote lead over Bill Nelson. Both are now up in Washington, D.C., going through the motions of getting ready for the next Senate. But it has turned into a circus down there. Now, earlier, there was supposed to be a deadline where the voting or the recount was supposed to be done by that. Broward actually came on out and said, we finished the recount ahead of schedule. But then another judge, U.S. District Court Judge Mark Walker, basically came on out and extended the deadline for recounting votes by an additional 2 days so that voters whose votes weren't counted because of issues with their signatures on their mail-in or provisional ballots have 2 more days to challenge the decision to reject their votes. In other words, they've got 2 more days to go on in and fix them up to get them past the system here. And there's still a lot of legal challenges going on back and forth. It really is Florida 2000 all over again, which I think is a good thing, because I am hoping that the American people are paying very good attention to all of this, and they're going to remember, we went through this before 18 years ago, and we were promised that by now we were going to have an honest, fair, reliable, accurate, verifiable election system, and we never got it because politicians don't want to actually let you have a vote. You might actually change something with it. They want you to think you've got a vote. But there's a long history of massively fraudulent elections in this country. And it even goes back way before the electronic machines. There was a book that was written by the Collier brothers. They made their fortune with the Hawaiian Tropic line of suntan oil. And they took their money, and one of them tried for a run for politics. And based on what he learned, they realized the system is completely rigged. That if you're not already part of the inside club, you will never be allowed in. So they wrote a book called Vote Scam, the first half of which you can read for free online. Just get on a web search engine, Vote Scam, all one word. And I believe the full book is still available for sale out there somewhere on Amazon. But even back then, and we know that there's been election fraud throughout the country's history. The problem is, I refuse to accept that the nation that could put men on the moon can't come up with a verifiable, honest, accurate, tamper-proof, cheat-proof election system. I refuse to accept that. So, anyway, getting on back to the courtrooms here, U.S. District Judge Mark Walker, who was the one who just extended the deadline by 2 days, is basically saying Florida is the laughing stock of the world, and saying that they failed to anticipate election problems. And he said the state law on recounts appears to violate the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that decided the presidency in 2000. Well, the good judge is wrong on a couple of points. First of all of these so-called election problems are the artifacts of trying to change the outcome. Going on in there with additional ballots, trying to basically cheat the system. And second of all, Judge Mark Walker needs to remember that one of the most bizarre aspects of Bush versus Gore at the Supreme Court was down at the very bottom. The very last thing the judges wrote was this was a one-time only decision and could not be cited as a precedent for anything else. So the judge is out there saying that they're locking in procedures that are not flexible enough to deal with problems. Well, actually, the idea is you have procedures which will deal with the problems. But the instant you have somebody come on in and say, oh, we got to change the rules because of X, Y, Z, that's when the door is opened to election fraud. All right, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network here. And apparently it turns out, remember the story about how they found a box of ballots in an Avis rental car out at the airport? And at first they thought, could be a bomb, could be a bomb. No, it's just ballots. Turns out the ballots were completely blank. So what are Broward County election workers doing, lugging around boxes of blank ballots outside of, you know, the control of or the observation of where the ballots are being counted? Supposedly at this part of the game they shouldn't need blank ballots. So there was something going on there. Now let's get on over to Brenda Snipes. I guess she's getting a little worn down. Earlier, she had announced her intention not to seek re-election to be the Broward County election supervisor, and that she would finish her term and then she would leave. Now, apparently, the story is changing. She's saying she might retire as soon as next week and just get on out. Get out of Dodge City before things get really hot, because now they're talking criminal investigations. And the federal investigators have already found indications of election documents being tampered with. Now, who was in charge of that county where they found all of this? Brenda. Okay? So, over in Georgia, they're still finding new votes. Oh my goodness, we have no idea why all these votes were not caught up the first time. And apparently the new votes they're bringing in are running 84, almost 85% for Stacey Abrams. And it's not just provisionals. These are election day and mail votes. And apparently new votes are being reported from places that supposedly were already 100% reported. Election fraud doesn't get any more obvious than this. And the Republicans who've been cheated of their office don't seem to want to do anything about it. Or maybe they do, and maybe the corporate media is just refusing to report on it. Because that's the corporate media's job, to make you think everything's just fine, and there's nothing suspicious about all these magically appearing ballots. There's nothing suspicious about there being more votes in a precinct than there are actual voters. And apparently, up in Maine, the Democrat Jared Golden won his election to the U.S. House of Representatives in Maine's 2nd Congressional District. So it's November 15th, and the Democrats are still picking up these seats. Now remember, if these were just honest accidents, they would fall to either side of that center line. But it always favors the Democrats. It always favors the Democrats. Now, Nancy Pelosi is out there. She's already preening, and she's very happy. She's already convinced she's going to be Speaker of the House again, and she basically came on out thanking Al Sharpton for saving America, because Sharpton was using his nonprofit civil rights organization to basically bring out the voters during the midterms. But that's saving America. I mean, that reveals their mindset. The Democrats are convinced that they and they alone know what's best for the rest of us. And I do not accept that, given some of the lunacies that we have seen lately. Now, Pelosi appears to be untroubled by the fact that so many Democrats in the House of Representatives are saying, we want to have somebody else. You had your turn as Speaker of the House. We want somebody else. And apparently some of the disgruntled Democrats have claimed they have 17 names on a letter opposing Pelosi's leadership. And they're going to air that document soon. And they say those signing on are pledging to vote against Pelosi when the full chamber elects the next Speaker over on January 3rd. So we've got a long way to go before that's going to happen. Now, Representative Kathleen Rice, Democrat of New York, confirmed the letter's existence Tuesday, and an aide to an organizer of the effort said it stood at 17 names as of Wednesday. And more than that, they were not allowed to say. Now, Pelosi was asked about this and basically just said, it's not a problem. It's not a big deal. Come on in, the water's warm. She's getting cocky. Whom the gods would destroy, they first make proud. And as it turns out, Pelosi does have a serious challenger. Representative Marcia Fudge, who represents Ohio's 11th District, has emerged as a potential and very real challenger to Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House. And again, there's a lot of discontent coming out of the progressive wing of the Democratic caucus. And while Democrats did win control over the House of Representatives, Pelosi has assumed the position as Speaker-elect. And rank-and-file Democrats are saying she may be just a little premature. They want new leadership. Or maybe they want leadership that's a less arrogant and domineering and pushing them around. So that could be. Okay, Judicial Watch's lawsuit against Hillary Clinton, they had their hearing. Some of the news is good. Some of the news is not so good. The court has ruled Hillary Clinton must answer key questions about her private email server under oath. And the questions are, describe the creation of the ClintonEmail.com system, including who decided to create the system, the date it was decided to create the system, why it was created, who set it up, and when it became operational. That's question 1. Question 2. During your October 22nd, 2015 appearance before the U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on Benghazi, you testified that 90 to 95% of your emails were in the state's system, and if they wanted to see them, they would certainly have been able to do so. Identify the basis for this statement, including all facts on which you relied in support of the statement, how and when you became aware of these facts, and if you were made aware of these facts by or through another person, identify the person who made you aware of those facts. Now, the reason these are critical is because Hillary Clinton, when she was asked these questions before during depositions, flat out refused to answer them. The attitude was, none your business. So Hillary is going to have to issue a statement under oath that she will be held to. And perjury, like violating Title 18 espionage laws, is a felony. And all it's going to take is one to kick her out of the 2020 campaign. Now, the bad news is that the court denied Judicial Watch's request to unseal the video depositions of Clinton's aides. So, again, more secrets being kept. And if I am right about what really lies behind that email server, I think Judicial Watch is going to start feeling a lot more resistance to what they're doing. I don't understand why the judge refused to unseal those video depositions of people like Huma Abedin. This is not classified information. It's not military secrets. It's a public interest political corruption story. So let's talk about Michael Avenatti, the porn lawyer who was out there enjoying his moment of fame, but now it's come back to haunt him, because he was arrested on suspicion of domestic abuse against his estranged, I think it was his girlfriend. He's denying it happened, says he's never hit a woman, but apparently the police have got photos of the woman in question showing her face very badly bruised and abrased. So Avenatti is out on $50,000 bond, but it looks like this may be the end of his meteoric rise to media stardom, because the Democrats are now pulling away. They're getting cold feet on him. And apparently he was supposed to be speaking up in Vermont at 2 events planned for this weekend. And the Vermont Democratic Party has basically canceled Avenatti's appearances, and they're refunding all the tickets. So, okay, now we are hearing more and more rumors that there are going to be more staff shakeups at the White House, which I think cannot help but be a good thing. And apparently, Vice President Mike Pence's Chief of Staff, Nick Ayers, has emerged as a leading candidate to succeed the current White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, who is soon to leave. And this is according to several White House officials and others close to the presidential train of thought, I guess you could say. Interesting little article that came on out basically saying that John Bolton has, in terms of sheer force of will, met his match in Melania Trump. And that this is what led to Melania's coming on out with that statement about how Bolton's assistant did not deserve the honor of working in the White House. And apparently the issue was that during Melania's recent trip to Africa, Bolton's assistant sort of cut back on things that Melania felt that she needed. And whether she did so on her own recognizance or at Bolton's request is hard to say. But apparently Melania is turning out to be a very poised, dignified, but strong-willed First Lady. So we'll see what's going to happen on that one. So let's talk about this Jim Acosta lawsuit. And apparently Fox News and other outlets, they've all jumped on, yes, you cannot tell us where we can go at the White House. It's up to us, the corporate media. We're allowed to open the door and walk into the White House whenever we feel like it. And, of course, that's absolutely ridiculous. And, again, when Barack Obama had Helen Thomas's press credentials revoked and had her kicked out of the White House press room, nobody made a fuss. Nobody made a fuss at all. Oh, well, it's Obama's prerogative. And she did ask a very delicate, sensitive question, which is what reporters are supposed to do. They're not supposed to just stand there and hurl statements, which is what Jim Acosta has been doing. But interestingly enough, the courts have already conceded the president has extremely wide latitude deciding who does and does not get into the White House press room. And it's not like Acosta was CNN's only reporter there. They've got another couple of dozen. It's just there. Actually, you know what CNN is doing? I just realized it. They're making a big stink out of this to try and boost their ratings, because their ratings are in the Al-Qaeda. And maybe the other news outlets are jumping on board too, because this is a story where they can pull back from the independent media. Yes, we'll show those independent media people we can create the news out of thin air and do it better than anybody else. So getting on back to the court situation, the judge said the president has wide latitude in determining who gets into that press room. And these media outlets agreed. Their entire argument is that once a press card has been granted, it should not be removable. It should not be weaponizable unless there's a clear danger to the life of the president from the person in question. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here, and we were talking about CNN's lawsuit against Donald Trump over Jim Acosta's press pass, and it was supposed to basically be over today, but the judge at the last second has postponed the final hearing where he'll issue his ruling until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Friday. So we'll have to wait a little bit longer on this, but I really, considering just how silly all of this is, I think CNN is doing this just to try and boost their ratings. I think that's all that they're interested in. They're not even interested in Acosta. Oh, and by the way, the latest Acosta defense is that the White House set this up, that it was all staged, managed, that the intern literally positioned herself where Acosta couldn't help but hit her. And I mean, it's just ridiculous. It really is ridiculous. Let's see. All right, take care of that later. Now, I'm going to step on back to the voting circus here because I'm seeing a couple of articles on 12160 Social Network where apparently in the recounts, votes have vanished. An estimated 2,000 to 3,000 votes have vanished in Broward County. And it actually impacted Nelson more than Scott. So Scott is making out good from this one. Let's see, over in more than a dozen precincts lost a substantial number of votes in Palm Beach County. They're now missing. And apparently they're saying they will not be able to finish the Senate recount. What a circus this is. Absolutely. Okay, let's take a phone call here. Mark in Los Angeles. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. It's really good to hear from you. I am calling you sort of a day behind. I'm one of the YouTube watchers, so like I don't know what's going on today. I'll watch you tomorrow on this particular show. But I'm calling in response to some of your viewers have issue with the call-in portion of your show. I hardly ever call in, but I do not. I wish that you do not stop taking in callers, because there are people like me, even though we don't call in, we feel completely isolated and verbally or politically castrated. You know, I'm in Los Angeles and I have no voice. So we're completely indebted to you for that, and I don't want to see that go away.
Well, you know, I got a lot of emails on both sides of this issue here, and as I explained the other day, sometimes I use the volume of calls as kind of a way of managing the load of the show. Some days when there's not a lot going on, I encourage the callers to call on in and just ramble away. On days like today, when I've just got a ton of stuff in the talking points list, then I try and just say, don't call in unless you got something really meaningful to say about the current topic.
See, okay, well, that's what I'm saying. Just my luck. I think about you. I mean, I watch you as daily. I try to send checks here and there because I truly understand that this whole thing is just going to collapse. Freedom is completely under.
Yeah, it's an ugly mess out there. It really is.
And Mike, today, if it's one of those days, I will hang up now and call you back tomorrow or the next day. You know what I'm saying? I respect you.
I think that would be a really, really good idea. And thank you very much here because. Okay, thanks an awful lot.
Remember, I'm Mark in Los Angeles, and you will hear from me again.
All right, thank you for the call, Mark. We're going to let you go, and we're going to start with Jim in Chicago. Jim, we're probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. A couple of things. I used to be an election judge in Chicago before I got tired of it. What's going on in Florida, Georgia, and other places is worse than Chicago. In fact, I would be more and more embarrassed being an election judge in those states, because granted there was some hanky-panky going on in Chicago, but we didn't make it so obviously like it is now. I mean, it just is something I had never seen before. And Chicago is famous for stealing elections. So other parts of the country, you guys are worse than Chicago. And the final thing, as far as Abernathy, now either this guy is a dumbass or the guy has a problem, because you would think him being a lawyer, he should just watch his P's and Q's, considering all the stuff that he's done in the media.
Well, I guess he's a person who's not really in control of his emotions. He's got a temper, and it can get to be a problem when people are too full of themselves, where their self-restraint becomes very, very weak. Anyway, listen, Jim.
I'll let you go, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to come back to more news after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently, down in Florida, Bill Nelson has filed yet another lawsuit, this one demanding full hand recounts because of all the problems with these ballot counting machines breaking down. And now, of course, we have, we had reports of there being more ballots than there should be. Now they're saying that ballots have gone missing. This election is a farce. We could literally get into a situation where it is impossible to determine exactly who won. And maybe that's the goal. Just mess it up real bad and then throw it to a politically friendly court, which is exactly what Bush did, which would lead me to believe that Gore actually did win. Anyway, so let's get into the conflict zones. There are so many of them right now. For some reason, the United States decided to conduct an air raid on an ISIL prison in Deir ez-Zor. So they bombed this ISIL-run prison in, I should point out, a residential area in southeastern Deir ez-Zor and killed scores of civilians who had been jailed by the terrorist group. I can't even begin to see what military necessity would lead to that. So, now, yesterday, as we mentioned, there was a bit of a fallout over the ceasefire with Gaza and between Gaza and Israel, which had led to the resignation of Avigdor Lieberman, Israel's defense minister. And a lot of people wondered if he was overreacting. But then there was a second resignation, and a little bit later in the show, we're going to be getting into the fact that Netanyahu is trying to avoid snap elections because it looks like his coalition is coming apart. But there may have been another reason for Lieberman to want to get out of there. And that is because ever since the Russian S-300s were deployed in Syria, there has not actually been an Israeli air attack. And maybe Lieberman was just feeling the pressure that he couldn't figure out how to pull it off. And he was probably getting a lot of pressure from the United States. Don't you dare let an F-35 get shot down. You'll destroy our entire marketing plan for that aircraft. So to me, that almost makes more sense that he decided he wanted to get out of there than the ceasefire with Gaza. Although Lieberman was always in favor of let's go on in and do what we want to do with Gaza here. So there have been setbacks both in Gaza and in Syria, and it is costing Israel. Now, apparently, according to some official ISIS documents, which were obtained by the Russia Today TV, reveal that the terrorist group uses financial incentives to motivate its fighters to use chemical weapons, which, as you know, are they're banned all over the world. And apparently some of these inducements included cash, silver, gold, even cars. And this, of course, does confirm that ISIS possessed chemical weapons that are banned throughout the world, and they were using them. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. What's on your mind?
Not only that, but they got paid extra if they shot down, or didn't they get a car if they shot down an airplane? I think it was something like that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they had the infrastructure, so that shows you that it was like a more than just a bunch of ragtag bunch of people. They had backing, and that backing is the Western powers and Saudi Arabia and Israel. You know that you know it's a fact by now. You know you can't dispute that. You know. Hey, Mike, Lieberman leaving the S-300. Yeah, they're not getting past that. That's going to be a wall of pain for them. So, I mean, you know that attack they did on Gaza the other day. You know
Yes.
How that started, right? Like Lieberman, while Netanyahu was away, they sent a special forces team and dressed as women, and it went bad.
Yeah.
An Israeli soldier got killed. So how do they respond? They bomb the Palestinians. You know, that's how they try to make it look like nothing happened. So I mean,
Well,
they're on the
demonizing and
Saudis
killing
are estimating.
Palestinians is just good politics in Israel, and it's a shame that it is that way, but that's how it works.
And Mike, you had a caller yesterday. I got to totally disagree with. Like I think you remember him. He says that you were wrong on the United States collapsing. He said it was like more of an implosion, but he brought up this fact that like, oh, Obama gave them all this money to pay off. No, that money was the Iranians
Yes.
from them pre-purchasing weapons back in the 70s because it was under the Shah of Iran.
Yep.
And when he got kicked out, you know, they took their government back, and this was their money that they put in as a down payment.
Yeah.
That was their money.
Yep.
I mean, we keep hearing that though. Oh, Obama gave them this money, that money. This was their money. I mean, as bad as Obama is, this was their money. It wasn't a payoff. This was their money from that the United States never gave back to them for weapons purchases. You know, if the U.S. wants to, you know, if you want to sell weapons, you know, you got to stick with the deal, right?
Yep.
Yep. And I think I have one more thing. Mike, you know, George Carlin was right. It's a rigged game, you know,
Yes.
and you know, it just seems like now. I mean, look at Trump's not doing anything about with the border. They're climbing over the fence in San Diego, for God's sake, Mike. Everybody's watching. Nobody's doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
The Border Patrol's not doing anything. The Pentagon's not doing anything. The Congress and the Senate's not doing anything. So this is all we got left. Nothing. Nobody's doing anything about them climbing over the wall.
Well, they
Why
did
build the wall,
arrest
Mike,
a
if
dozen
nobody's
of
going
them.
to do anything?
They did arrest a dozen of them, which, wow, I'm impressed. You know, 10,000, you know, barbarians heading for the gates, and they've arrested 12 of them. You know, way to go, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Yeah, it's another epic fail. It's another epic fail. And I think the issue here is that our government has become so loaded up with politicians, it can't function any longer because there aren't people in power and positions of authority who actually know what to do. It's all salesmanship and sound bites and media interviews.
What's the use of paying for a Border Patrol on a wall if you can just climb over the wall, or the Border Patrol is going to stand by? Then it's just a wasted money and a scam. It's a scam to keep the federal government in business.
It really is. And again, remember, Eisenhower in Operation Wetback, he shut that border down completely with only 10% of the resources ICE has today. And of
Mike,
course, the big problem here is we've got to start enforcing Title VIII. We have got to take away that financial incentive for these people to come across the border and vote Democratic and then help themselves to all kinds of free stuff that we're paying for.
And Mike, real quick, if I still have time, I want to talk about Amazon moving to New York. What a scam that is! $5 billion.
Okay,
Amazon
Dustin, I need to cut you off here. I think I made it very clear at the beginning of the show. I've got a lot of talking points I need to get through today, and
Okay,
I'm
Mike,
asking
no
for
problem.
callers to restrict themselves to the current topic here. So, Dustin, thank you very much. And Dan in Illinois, aloha, Dan. The current topic is Syria. Do you have something to say about that?
Well, yeah, I was wondering, Syria, if you had ever seen any of the videos of all this armaments that the Syrian army has taken away from the surrendering ISIS and Al-Qaeda types down there. They have videos of it where they got them displayed on runways, and this is top of the line stuff.
Yeah, so Israeli made, European made,
stuff.
American made.
Yeah, and real quick, have you ever seen any videos about this stuff going down in Colombia and Venezuela?
Yes, I have, but that's not the current topic, okay? And Dan...
Okay, I understand.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're going to let you go, and we're going to close the lines because I really do have a lot of stuff that I feel very much you all need to be paying attention to. And maybe when we get to hour number 3, we'll be able to open the phone lines again. But very often I get a sense that people are calling on in to try and take us off the current topic. And today I'm really not in a mood to put up with that. So, getting on back to Syria, that's the current topic. I should have a little flip sign on the wall behind here. You know, current topic is Syria, and that's what we're talking about. As you know, as it has come on out that the U.S. government was behind the creation of ISIS. Now, of course, the U.S. Special Representative for Syria Engagement, James Jeffrey, is saying, no, really, the Syrian government came up with ISIS. You know, they came up with ISIS, and they created ISIS to protect the people from Assad or something like that. But, I mean, again, they're trying to deal with the reality that every time another one of these ISIS groups surrender, they're caught with American weapons, or Israeli weapons, or European weapons. And we keep seeing these videos of American helicopters evacuating ISIS and Al-Qaeda commanders from areas where the Syrian army is closing on in. It's very obvious what's going on out here. Okay. Now, apparently yesterday, in a vote that was mostly along party lines, the House passed the Manage Our Wolves Act 201-187. The vote effectively blocked all debate on the war in Yemen and precluded that conflict from coming up for a future vote. This is one of the weird things about our system of government that we cannot allow when we rebuild. And that is that every bill before Congress is for one purpose and one purpose alone. And one of the ways that we get cheated and the special interests win is they'll have a bill that everybody knows must pass. And so various members of Congress will add in these riders that are completely irrelevant to the subject at hand. This bill was supposed to be about managing the wolf population. And they put in this rider, and they used this rider to block all future debate on the Yemen war. That's something that definitely has to go when we're planning for the next country here. Every bill before Congress is for one purpose and one purpose alone, which, by the way, is the way it's set up in the Constitution. The problem was the Constitution did not explicitly forbid combining bills. So, over in Saudi Arabia, their public prosecutor, Sheikh Shahlan al-Shahlan, has said that the kingdom will seek the death penalty for 5 suspects among the 11 charged in the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, confirming suspicions that members of the murder squad purportedly sent to interrogate Khashoggi will now themselves face beheadings. And of course, at the same time, the public prosecutor has said there's absolutely no evidence that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman knew about this or had anything to do with it, and he's absolved from any suspicion, at least within Saudi Arabia. As far as the rest of the world, we don't know. But the Saudi royal family is closing ranks around the Crown Prince. There is still apparently a movement within the royal family to get him to step down, and we may see something interesting happening along that line. But what's really interesting is the difference between the Skripal case and the Khashoggi case, where the West just came up with this incredibly fantastic story trying to pin it on Vladimir Putin with zero evidence. And they're still out there saying, oh, yes, he did it, we've got to sanction him even more. And here you have a Washington Post journalist who was apparently chopped up alive, and they're going to let Saudi Arabia just dump it on some underlings and walk away. So there's the difference. By the way, little side note, back in 2009, there was a leaked cable, and it labeled Saudi Arabia the most significant source of funding to terrorist groups worldwide. So every time you have the corporate media coming on out and say, Iran is the greatest state sponsor of terror. No, they aren't. They didn't even make the list. It was Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, and Pakistan. And of course, if you look at all the armaments the United States was buying for terrorist groups inside Syria, then the United States is also on that list as well here. Now, this whole Khashoggi affair has left a bad taste in everybody's mouth, and needless to say, Turkey is very upset that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is being allowed to basically skate on this. And so once again proving that you cannot trust the United States government, in an attempt to appease Erdogan, there is now a rumor that the White House is going to expel the cleric Gulen from the U.S. to appease Erdogan. Now, this cleric, Fethullah Gulen, he's been living for years in rural Pennsylvania, and he may now basically be expelled. And Erdogan thinks that this guy was behind the failed coup d'etat some years ago. I don't think this is a really good idea. Not because I'm being a humanitarian, but because Turkey will grab this guy and they will torture him into saying whatever Erdogan needs to come back and embarrass Donald Trump. So the whole international situation is chaos right now. It really, really, really is. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break. The phone lines are still closed. Thank you for your patience on that. We'll be back with more news after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I mentioned this a little earlier in the program, but we're going to get back to it. Apparently, Netanyahu over in Israel has triggered a serious backlash among the war hawks in his government. And Avigdor Lieberman has basically resigned from the defense ministry, and he's removing the party that he is in charge of, Yisrael Beitenu, from the coalition. Now, the Bavit Yehudi faction has voted to demand that the current education minister, Naftali Bennett, become defense minister. If not, they will quit the coalition. And Netanyahu has already said he's hanging on to being defense minister. So he may be dealing with some snap elections coming on up. And I think a lot of people are probably in the West Bank and Gaza Strip are saying, yeah, it's time to see a change in the wind, as it were. Now, as you know, there is supposed to be this ceasefire in place between Gaza and Israel, and less than 24 hours after the ceasefire was put in place, Israeli soldiers shot and killed a fisherman in Gaza. And Gaza's health ministry identified the dead man as Nawaf Ahmed al-Altar. He's 20 years old. And the head of Gaza's Fishers Union said that Israeli soldiers positioned on land shot at al-Altar when he was only 30 meters into the sea in northern Gaza. Now, Israel has restricted access to the sea for fishing since Monday evening, according to the rights group Gisha. Now, on Wednesday, Israel partly lifted the restrictions, but banned fishers from working in the waters of northern Gaza, which is 1/3 of the coastline. And so this guy basically 30 meters out into the ocean, and that justified shooting him dead. All right. Now, as you know, we're heading into winter. We're going to be talking about Climate Gate a little bit later in the show. It's starting to really, really hit. The old Farmer's Almanac was absolutely right. Hitting early, going to be very, very hard. Over in Ukraine, they have got a major problem because there is a serious heating crisis that's going to affect hundreds of thousands of people in Ukraine. Remember, Ukraine has not been paying Russia for the natural gas, and Russia has been closing that valve down. So right now, there is no heat presently for millions of Ukrainians. And apparently, this has already triggered street protests in many locations. There have actually even been riots. Now, yesterday, we were talking about Ukraine's upcoming elections. Poroshenko may be out. And that young lady, I think her name is Timoshenko, may be in. But she's going to have to deliver real fast. Now, I get a lot of emails and phone calls talking about how there doesn't seem to be any opposition to the wars. That, too, is another media-created delusion. And when we come back from station identification, I will further elucidate. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are still closed. I'm probably going to open them up sometime toward the bottom of the hour, but I do want to get through all of this. So anyway, before we went to the station identification break, I was talking about how I get emails and phone calls from people saying the American public just doesn't seem to really care about the wars. That's not true. There are protests out there. The corporate media will not let you see them. That's what's going on here. And, for example, when George W. Bush got that Philadelphia Liberty Medal, there were protesters outside. There were Afghanistan veterans blocked entrances to the National Constitution Center, where Joe Biden was giving the Liberty Medal to George W. Bush. And so that was one protest. That was November 12th. This is all current stuff here. And then there was the Women's March on the Pentagon. Don't know if you saw that one. Hang on, let me back up here a little bit. Yeah, and the protest against George W. Bush was organized by About Face, Veterans Against the War. So there were a lot of people involved. So, moving along here, I'm sorry I was glancing at my watch, we're getting a tsunami warning here. So there was the Women's March on the Pentagon, and this was people like from Code Pink, Cindy Sheehan, Medea Benjamin, Jill Stein, and they marched at the Pentagon. This was on October 21st, and they had sister marches in Los Angeles, Fresno, California, Madison, Wisconsin, Cleveland, Ohio, Patchogue, New York, Las Vegas, Nevada, Vancouver, Canada, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Asheville, North Carolina, Seattle, Washington, Buffalo, New York, Montclair, New Jersey, Austin, Texas, and West Hartford for Connecticut here. Okay? You understand what's going on. The corporate media is keeping you distracted. They don't want you to see that. You know, pay no attention to those protesters out at the street. They're going to give you double plus ungood thoughts. They might remind you there's a war going on. And by the way, have you noticed that we're not getting a lot of war coverage at all? Which tells us things are not going good. We're not doing well in Afghanistan. We're certainly not doing very well over there in Syria. Okay, on last September 19th, there was a protest at a Hudson Institute event organized by Medea Benjamin. And this was a protest against Mike Pompeo's assistant, Brian Hook, and his neocon buddies, who are out there trying to sell the idea why it's okay that the Trump administration withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in order to slam that nation with starvation sanctions. And apparently Medea just stormed the stage and condemned the U.S. imperialism, so good for Medea. On October 16th, remember when Henry Kissinger was out there? He was invited to speak at an NYU Business School event, and protesters showed up. There were protests both inside and outside of the event, and it attracted a tremendous amount of attention and actually did get a segment of coverage on Fox News, in which huffy, sputtering pundits wagged their fingers at the young demonstrators for interrupting, Kissinger. He's an icon. He's a foundation of all that this nation stands for. Yeah, like war crimes. Do you know that there are nations where Henry Kissinger cannot set foot or he will be arrested? And let's see, this one was back on September 25th of this year. Mike Pompeo was out there with John Bolton at the United Against a Nuclear Iran Summit. Again, pushing the war agenda. We've got to get those people. And this was, the protest was organized by Code Pink. And this one actually did get a little bit of media attention in the Washington Post. But again, you don't see these things up on ABC, CBS News, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, CNBC. You don't see that stuff. They don't want you to know that your fellow citizens are opposed to these wars. And probably the best thing that you can all be doing right now, I mean, we're encouraging everybody to talk. Go back to the good old-fashioned art of conversation and talk to people. And we're coming up here on Thanksgiving. And while the general rule of thumb is don't talk politics during Thanksgiving, it's an opportunity to get on out there and say, how do you feel about the wars? Because I think it's bad. I think we're killing a lot of people for no real reason. These countries didn't attack us. We'll probably get back to, they're a threat to our interests. Okay, tell me what those interests are. I actually did that once when I was confronted by somebody who was in the military who just gone for the Kool-Aid. And, why are we attacking Iraq? Well, they're a threat to our interests. And those interests would be. And I got this blank look. And finally I said to her, okay, so you're out here saying it's justified to kill the Iraqi people, but you don't know why. So we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just rejoining the network. And finally, this one actually took a while. This was organized by Cindy Sheehan, and I don't have the exact date, but I assume it was sometime this last year. And she went on a hunger strike for Yemen. It was a 27-day fast. In fact, yeah, it's still ongoing. That's why they don't have a date on it. So there are protests out there. The American people do not like war, and they are trying to get their voices heard. But the TV networks are filtering it out. Corporate social media is filtering it out. That's why we have to turn away. We have to start talking to each other. We have to communicate with each other with, direct face-to-face. The next thing, it'll be the email that's being filtered to remove objectionable content, like you think war is bad. How could you object to war? War's great. War is fun. War is good for business. War, it's fantastic. My favorite line from Hot Shots Part 2. Alrighty, well, to nobody's surprise, this is coming out of the Kaiser report here, defense contractors are seeing a boom time under the Democrats. I remember when I was a kid, it was the Republicans who were the party of war and death and blood, and it was the Democrats who were the party of peace. Well, unfortunately today, it looks like both parties are in favor of war because it's making them a lot of money. Need to check out their stock portfolios here. Speaking of war, and we're getting this from Sputnik News, the United States $6 trillion war on terror is expected to grow larger. This war on terror has been going on for 17 years, and the U.S. has become involved on the ground in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Sputnik News doesn't really know it's a lot worse than that. We're stuck in, there are 7 acknowledged official conflicts going on right now. So $6 trillion, that's enough money to end world hunger for 200 years, using the metric of $30 billion annually, which we get from the United Nations. And there was a little detail in this article that I don't think a lot of people had realized before. When the Pentagon comes up with a program and says, this is our brand new F-35 and it's going to cost us only $1 trillion, that does not include the cost of the financing, because the Pentagon doesn't have $1 trillion. They're going to borrow it from the Federal Reserve. And those interest payments, they're not sure what they're going to be, so they are not included on the original cost estimate. And that's another reason why these things spiral completely out of control. As you know, the major utility companies out in California are dealing with the fires, which are finally starting to wind down. The winds have let up here a little bit. But Pacific Gas and Electric is in serious trouble. They're basically imploding. And if you remember the movie Erin Brockovich, Pacific Gas and Electric is infamous as the company that exposed the town of Hinckley, California, to hexavalent chromium, which is highly toxic and carcinogenic. So PG&E is already looking at the potential for massive lawsuits, because it's now known their equipment failure is what sparked the fires. And they just got done paying off for another fire from 2015. So their stock went into a tailspin, and it's not looking very good. And the problem is that a lot of hedge funds are invested in these giant utilities because under normal circumstances, they're seen as rock solid, dependable investments. And so some of these hedge funds that were invested in PG&E, they're getting hammered. They're getting hammered real hard. PG&E might have to file for bankruptcy protection, or they could hire a public relations firm to get somebody in a turban to run around and say, I'm ISIS, I started the fires, please leave your beautiful electric companies alone, I'm ISIS, I'm evil, blah, 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 blah. And I'm saying that only half in jest because somebody's already put that out there, that the California wildfires were started by ISIS. All right. Anyway, investor Stanley Druckenmiller was recently interviewed by Real Vision. And basically his attitude was one of extreme pessimism, saying that this is the most troubled I've been about my future, maybe ever. And I think anybody who's objectively looking at the economy is going to say, we understand that. We understand exactly what you're doing. Now, Paul Tudor Jones says really scary moments as the Fed rate hikes trigger a credit crisis. It's not just a stock crisis, it's a credit crisis. Liquidity appears to be drying up. And just let me see what they closed at. Well, they managed to get our markets into the green at the last minute. Bitcoin, on the other hand, has crashed to its lowest level in over a year. And apparently it had a dead cat bounce today, but on Wednesday it dropped lower than 6,000, which was considered its key support level. Meanwhile, the British pound sterling has taken a nosedive, in part because of the political turmoil going on in Great Britain, because the Brexit negotiations have thrown the British government into chaos. And so there's been a huge drop in the British markets. Shares in banks, retailers, and house building are tumbling. Retailers are deep in the red. So they're getting ready to see what's going to happen over there. Now, over in Iran, Tehran's envoy to Great Britain says the U.S. has failed to rally the world community behind its new sanctions against Iran, and that Iran possesses enough leverage to keep its oil sales going, despite U.S. attempts to reduce them to zero. And he went on to say, we have lots of alternatives because we have had some experience from the past. We know that, in fact, the difference this time is that countries are not ready to comply with the United States request. So, meanwhile, the plan to have an alternative payment channel for Iran is on hold while everybody agrees it's a good idea, including Brussels itself. The United States has put intense pressure on all of the member states of the EU, and none are willing to be the headquarters for this alternative payment system. Okay. Iraq has rejected the U.S. deadline to halt Iran gas imports, and saying that they can't survive without it. Any halt to the supplies would create a power crisis. They tried to do it earlier this year, and they had several days of unrest in Basra. So Iraq has extensive trade ties with Iran and heavily depends on Iranian natural gas imports for electricity generation. So the world really is turning away from the United States, saying, we don't want to play the way you play anymore. We're tired of being part of the gang that just beats other people up and says, you will use our currency, you will use our electronic transfer system, and then we can use that in turn to control you. That really, in a nutshell, is the U.S. economic policy toward the rest of the world. You will use the dollar. You will use SWIFT. And we, in turn, will use the dollar and SWIFT to control you, to get you to do what we tell you to do. That's it. And the rest of the world is kind of tired of that. Meanwhile, over at the International Monetary Fund, little bit of a surprise and a reversal. Christine Lagarde is out there saying that central banks could issue digital money. And she made this statement at a speech in Singapore. And she said there may be a role for the state to supply money to the digital economy. She says the advantage of central banks being able to issue digital money is it's instantaneous. The payment would be immediate, safe, cheap, and potentially semi-autonomous. And central banks would retain a sure footing in payments. So apparently, according to Christine Lagarde, the central banks in Canada, China, Sweden, and Uruguay were all seriously considering digital currency proposals, which means when you go to that central bank, it's just like your local bank. Type a keyboard, the money is there, ready to accrue interest and to spend. All right. As you know, there are many iconic retailers who are in serious trouble, and this year's holiday shopping season is expected to be a bit of a shakeout in which a lot of iconic retailers are going to go away. And we know how many we've already lost here. And we know that Sears is likely to be going away very soon. Apparently, the unsecured creditors have filed a lawsuit to force the bankruptcy court to order Sears to just liquidate completely right now and start making payouts, rather than Sears' plan, which was to close half of their stores, the low-performing ones, and then take one more try at getting back to profitability. And apparently the Sears creditors are saying they don't see it as happening. And I tend to be in agreement, based primarily on the Sears we have here locally, where the quality of the products is not very good. And of course, having already sold off their Craftsman's tool division, that was the goose that was laying the golden egg. But apparently Macy's is also in serious trouble. And unlike Sears, Macy's didn't miss the train on online sales. They've got an online presence. But that hasn't stopped the decline in their brick and mortar business. So Macy's may be in trouble. So this Thanksgiving, that parade down Manhattan, maybe one kid with a balloon that says Macy's on it. Could be that. Let's get on over here to Goldman Sachs. You've probably been hearing about this before. It's called the 1MDB scandal. And Goldman Sachs is up to their neck in it. And even by Wall Street standards of gouging their customers, this was a doozy. Now, back in 2012 and 2013, the Malaysian government was raising $6.5 billion from investors, claiming it was for a sovereign wealth fund to finance various domestic infrastructure investment projects. We're going to take a break now for commercials. More about this story when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And boy, this just gets better and better and better. Getting all the way back over to Florida again. Florida officials in Tallahassee are now saying that nearly 200,000 voters in the state may not have been U.S. citizens. And apparently, earlier in the week, they'd identified more than 2,600 people who are in Florida legally but ineligible to vote. And apparently, as they kept looking, they just kept finding more and more and more. And they've turned up a list of nearly 182,000 people who may not be U.S. citizens. And they're not supposed to vote. And because we're not allowed to have, voter ID, non-citizens can vote. And the Democrats made no secret of the fact they were going to be using, or they were relying on illegals to vote. Apparently, there's been a lawsuit filed up in Pennsylvania alleging that 100,000 non-citizens are registered to vote up there. And apparently it's been a problem for decades. So again, if you get a chance, go over to my main page, go up to the upper left, look at that seriously outdated photo of me, and directly below it you'll see an article, How to Have Honest Elections. And I think it's a workable idea. But the way our system is set up now, it is just wide open to manipulation. It is wide open to manipulation. And it really is out of control. Alrighty, getting on back to the news. We were talking about Goldman Sachs, and they're implicated in this 1MDB Malaysian State Investment Fund. And Goldman Sachs' cut of raising the $6.5 billion sovereign wealth fund was 10%. That's usurious. Basically, that's $600 million for putting together this sovereign wealth fund. And the Malaysian authorities didn't kick up a fuss about it. Well, it turned out that what was going on is these Malaysian authorities were going to dip into this $6.5 billion fund themselves. That they were setting up one of the biggest frauds in history, and they were buying Goldman Sachs' blue chip reputation to pull in naive investors to the 1MDB State Investment Fund. And Goldman Sachs had to know that's what was going on. And of course, nothing will ever happen to them. But at least their blue chip reputation is a little less blue than it was before. And let's see, I was looking for something here. I'm just following up on something. Okay, Claire said that there was an update on a story, but I can't find it. Now, over at Wells Fargo, another one of these very crooked banks that justifies Jesse James' comments, Wells Fargo is adopting an unusual defense against a shareholder lawsuit, claiming that shareholders cannot hold the bank accountable for CEO Tim Sloan's statements that it was working to restore trust and to be more transparent about its scandals. because it should have been obvious that Sloan was lying. That's their defense. Saying we'd tell the truth was so absurd, we can't be sued for lying about it. Now, what Wells Fargo is trying to claim is that what CEO Tim Sloan was engaging in was a practice called puffery, which is making a statement that you just know is really meaningless. Like, we make the world's greatest hamburgers, or the world's fastest racing bicycle. It's considered puffery because you just know that there may be better hamburgers or better bicycles out there, but it's part of the selling. But that's Wells Fargo's idea. And puffery is not actionable in court, so they may get away with it. The CEO may have just gotten away with lying to his own shareholders. So, okay. All right, let's see. Down in Australia, there is a situation going on, and it has to do with the Reserve Bank of Australia and the fact that they, too, like so many other banks around the world, are supposed to have a certain amount of gold bullion in their reserves, but it doesn't seem to be there. And they're, well, we're going to take a break here for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Before we get back to Australia, this is just now coming on in. Florida elections officials have announced the results from the first machine recount today, and Rick Scott wins the recount. He actually increased his lead over Bill Nelson. He's calling on Bill Nelson to concede. I would be very surprised if he did. I have a feeling this is not over. It's not over at all. So we're getting on back to Australia. I'm sorry, Australia. And the Reserve Bank of Australia, like so many other reserve banks around the world, is supposed to have a certain amount of gold bullion in there. And there are these activists, if you will, who were trying to basically get some transparency from the Reserve Bank, saying how much gold is actually in there. And last week, it looked like the RBA was going to go along with that because they set up a new official web page showing their gold holdings. But all of a sudden, the RBA is now silent. They're refusing to answer any further questions. And apparently it comes on down to the fact there are 11 tons of gold which should be in the vaults of the Reserve Bank of Australia, but nobody can say where it is. And of course, you have these rumors circulating in Europe that gold at the Bank of England has gone missing, as well as the fact that the Bank of England is refusing to hand the Venezuelan government their gold back, citing the possibility of money laundering as the justification for doing that. So the question is, where has all the gold gone? Because we keep hearing these stories about the New York Fed, the gold that was supposed to be there, that's not there. JP Morgan, the gold that was supposed to be there, that's not there. Bank of England, same thing. Bank of France, same thing. Countries that are trying to get their gold back from these bullion depositories like Germany, they had a really, really tough time of it. Somebody really got away with robbing Fort Knox. Shades of Thunderball. And again, for those of you who have access to reruns of History Channel, we covered this on America's Book of Secrets, the gold conspiracy. Somebody in the high reaches of those financial towers has been playing fast and loose with other people's gold. Jesse James was right. The bankers are the real outlaws. Now, as you know, we're in the middle of Trump's trade war with China, and it's causing a lot of harm to the people of China. It's starting to cause a lot of harm here. Soybean farmers, they're running out of places to store the surplus. And so it's getting a little tense out there. But there's this interesting article that came on out of WilliamEngdahl.com saying that the real agenda behind the trade war is not civilian, but military. And it sounds really good to the public that this is all about rebalancing America's huge trade deficit problem, which is a problem. There's no question about that. But apparently, this is really about the defense industrial base of the United States and the realization that when the Pentagon hands out a defense contract to an American corporation like Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics, these companies, in order to maximize their profitability, are going to other places for raw materials or subcomponents. Mostly, they're going to China. And what Trump is trying to do is basically financially incentivize these defense contractors to start dealing with American suppliers. And in order to bolster that, Trump has got to put a capital investment into building factories in this country that can supply these components and materials. And they're not going to get them all. Those rare earths on which so many electronics are now dependent, there are not a lot of them here within the continental United States itself. But I guess it makes sense if you're getting ready to go to war against a country, and you want to make sure that your own army is not actually economically dependent on them. So, and again, this is where our abandonment of manufacturing comes back to haunt us. There's a lot of things that need to be made to fight a war. Circuit boards, helmets, vests, things like that. And a lot of electronics. And you have to have people who know how to manufacture, who know how to set up a production line and keep it running properly. And as we've allowed our manufacturing to decline, companies here who could make these components, they went out of business. Cheaper to go to Asia. Cheaper to offshore. And our domestic manufacturing talent, they went as well. They got lured away. Better money, more respect. Because our culture, following World War II, when we got into that whole scientific management and the Masters in Business Administration, we literally created a generation of, first of all, mid-level managers and then later top-level executives with no respect for manufacturing or for people who actually make things. And that's something else that drove these people to seek homes in other countries, where the ability to make things is still highly respected. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the border, because there's a lot going on down there. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, Border Patrol police in the San Diego sector have managed to arrest about a dozen members of the migrant caravan. Oh, whoopee, 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 10,000 people out there. They've got 12 so far, and nobody has any idea how many got over that fence. And they were just scaling up that fence like crazy. Now, on the far side, on the U.S. side, on the top, there is razor wire. But if they're strong enough, they can literally just jump over that. Of course, they risk breaking something on the way down. But that fence is proving to be a less than wonderful barrier. Mostly, I'm wondering, we were told all these military forces are down there. Where are they? I know a lot of them are still over in Texas running out the razor wire. Now, interestingly enough, on the Mexican side of the border, there are Mexican protesters protesting against the caravan, just saying, go home. We don't want you here. Apparently there was a fight that broke out, and the migrant caravan organizers are out there trying to make a big deal about how the customs police refused to break up the fight. Well, the fight was on the Mexican side of the border. And Customs and Border Patrol, their jurisdiction ends at that fence. So let's talk about Great Britain. Lots of intense things going on over there. As you know, Theresa May had announced they had an agreement, a Brexit agreement, and then somebody leaked it out, and it turned out to be everything that everyone was concerned about. Theresa May was just giving everything the EU wanted. Permanent entanglement of the economy, permanent entanglement of immigration, permanent entanglement of regulatory compliance, and that just infuriated a lot of people. And now there have been 7 high-profile resignations. Labour is claiming the Conservative government is at risk of completely dissolving. Now, Salish Vara, the Minister of State in the Northern Ireland office, was the first top official to resign after the Prime Minister announced that her cabinet had reached this draft EU withdrawal agreement. And an hour after his announcement, Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab, the man charged with finalizing the deal, said he was stepping down, stating that the Brexit deal in its current form, meaning Theresa May's version, suffers from deep flaws. Esther McVey, Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, submitted her letter of resignation shortly afterward. More resignations have followed. Now, at this point, it's very obvious Theresa May is a closet globalist. She's been working very, very hard to not let this go forward. She's been opposed to a no-deal Brexit, just, put gates on the tunnel, go back to the, and just go with it. Now, Jacob Rees-Mogg has actually launched a formal bid to remove Theresa May today. And basically came on out reminding everybody that if 48 Tory MPs write to Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of their backbench 1922 committee, a vote of confidence, no confidence, will be held. And to judge by his enthusiasm, it seems that Mr. Rees-Mogg's, the threshold has been crossed. They've got the votes. So that will be interesting. And apparently the Tory Brexiteers are mounting an all-out bid to just get rid of her. She betrayed her country. She betrayed her own party. She betrayed the principles of Brexit. She betrayed the voters. We should not allow leaders who refuse to listen to their own people to remain in office. And I'm glad that Britain has a mechanism for removing somebody like that. Apparently, at a Greek refugee camp, a Syrian migrant, 20 years old, has been arrested for raping a 3-year-old boy. Like I said, when you've got this migration thing going on, it's a filtering process. You're not getting the best of the people from the home countries. You're getting the dregs. The criminals, the contagious, people fleeing prosecution, deviants. That's what's happening here. Okay, story out of fairus.org talking about the fiscal cost of resettling refugees in the United States. And here are the numbers. The cost per refugee to the American taxpayers is just under $79,600 every year for the first 5 years after a refugee is resettled in the United States. I'll let you get your calculators out and work that out for yourself. Now, in 2016, the State Department spent nearly $545 million to process and resettle refugees, including $140 million on transportation costs. Remember how they were taking these refugees and they were flying them all over the country, get them spread all out, so it would be impossible to get them back. That's what that was, $140 million. Of the $1.8 billion with a B in resettlement costs, $867 billion was spent on welfare alone. In their first 5 years, approximately 54% of all refugees will hold jobs that pay less than $11 an hour. $71 million will be spent to educate refugees and asylum seekers, a majority of which will be paid by state and local governments. Over 5 years, an estimated 15.7% of all refugees will need housing assistance, which is roughly $7,600 per household in 2014 dollars. And the first thing that occurs to me is, wouldn't it be nice if that cash was being spent on our homeless veterans? Or even our homeless non-veterans? Why are the refugees and the illegal immigrants getting a better deal from the government of the United States of America than the people of the United States of America? Okay, let's talk about the California fire. The good news is the winds are dying down, but these have been horrible, and apparently in Southern California, they're now saying that the destruction from the fire is expected to be significantly higher than the already documented 435 structures, and that's because there's a lot of canyon areas where there'll be little cabins and private homes up there, and they're going to have to be searched by foot. That's going to take several days. But authorities are saying the risk from the fire has dropped significantly. People are going home to many areas where they were previously evacuated, and they get to find out if they have their homes or not. Pierce Brosnan, you remember him from the James Bond movies. Apparently he and his wife lost their $3.5 million home. And he's basically out there lobbying for more aid for his neighbors there in Malibu. Interestingly enough, in Los Angeles, KNBC was the only Los Angeles news to report on the potential release of radiation from the Santa Susana Field Laboratory, which got burned over by the Woolsey fire. Now remember, there was a lot of experimentation there. I mean, when the lab was first built, it was kind of out in the boonies, and Simi Valley just kind of crept up to the edge of it, and it got close enough, and they said, well, maybe we should go do this stuff someplace else. But the damage was already done. It's one of the most toxic places. And they did a lot of experimental nuclear reactors there, and because they were considered experimental, they did not have containment structures. One of them was an experimental sodium-cooled reactor for military application. It suffered a meltdown, and the meltdown is still going on. They can't go down and dig it out. It's working its way deeper and deeper into the earth. Now, had they bothered to ask, the U.S. probably would have learned from the Russians that sodium-cooled reactors are not worth the trouble, because they tried to come up with it. The idea of using sodium instead of water in the primary cooling loop was to extract more energy from the reactor to drive your submarine. But there we are here. But a lot of people are very, very angry. They're beginning to realize this fire did not need to happen. And victims of California's Camp Fire have filed a lawsuit against Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, made infamous by Higley, for basically cutting corners, ignoring faults and problems to protect their bonuses. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. And in the last segment of our program, I reported the story that Florida elections officials had declared Rick Scott the winner of the recount. He'd actually increased his lead over Bill Nelson, calling on Bill Nelson to concede. And remember, I said, I don't see Bill Nelson conceding, and I don't think this is over. And this is one of those cases of, gee, I hate it when I'm always right, because apparently the Florida Secretary of State has just ordered a manual recount for the U.S. Senate race between Rick Scott and Senator Bill Nelson, along with a manual by-hand recount of the Commissioner of Agriculture races. So it just goes on, and it goes on, and it just goes on. Alrighty, so let's get on back here. We're talking about what's going on with the California fires and how a lot of the victims of the California's Camp Fire have filed a lawsuit against PG&E, which I expect is probably going to go class action with a lot of people. And the suit accuses PG&E of being responsible for the fire, claiming it failed to properly maintain its equipment and infrastructure. And this is not the first time that PG&E has been accused of this, and it's not the first time they've been sued, and it's not even the first time they've lost a lawsuit. They just got done having to pay for a fire they started back in 2015. So apparently one lawyer is claiming PG&E bypassed preventative measures just a day before the fire, claiming it wanted to protect company bonuses instead. Now, PG&E did inform the California Public Utilities Commission that a high voltage power line experienced a problem near the origin of the campfire just minutes before the blaze broke out. So I can understand why PG&E stockholders are dumping their stocks, and while the hedge funds may be in trouble. Now, there have been some positive stories of people who were being very heroic. And we talked yesterday about this billionaire who lost his home and his winery in the fire, but still decided to take his $25 million yacht, 140 feet long, and use it to ferry emergency supplies to the people of Malibu who were cut off on both sides by PCH. And the paddle boaters and surfers, kayakers ferried it all in there. So that kind of thing sort of reminds you there are still good people in this world. So this is another good story. This came out from the Daily Mail, and it's basically that veterinarian workers, in fact, there's this organized group, the North Valley Animal Disaster Group. They set up shop inside a hospital that had already been abandoned, and they set up this makeshift clinic to take care of wild animals and pets left for dead in the California wildfires. And that included 258 cats, 188 dogs, 76 chickens, 41 birds, including a handful of brightly colored parrots and 5 rabbits. Now, larger animals were transported to the Butte County Showgrounds in Gridley, California, and again, little heroics there. We'll be back with more after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And we're going to keep the phone lines closed because I have got so much stuff to get through, and I'm probably going to have to take some of it into tomorrow's show. And a little reminder, the lovely Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3. So we're talking about the California wildfires and how even people who have suffered tremendous loss are still out there trying to help their friends and neighbors. So there was this nurse, Alan Pierce, and was working with a group effort of people, just trying to take care of people who were harmed by the fires in the town of Paradise, where the paramedics, doctors, and nurses continued treating patients in the parking lot as the hospital burned behind them. And if you've seen the aerial shots of Paradise, it is gone. It is just wiped from the face of the earth. So this Alan Pierce lost his house and his workplace in the fire, and his truck that he was using to help bring people out was heavily burnt, still running, and really messed up. And he posted it out there on social media, whereupon he got a post back from Toyota of America saying, "We would be honored to give you a new truck." So that's a good one. And I'm hoping that all these people who did lose their homes and their places of business, they had the appropriate insurance. But again, insurance companies don't like to insure people who live in brush fire areas. So we'll see what happens. Now, you're probably familiar with this singer, Pink. I love her Mr. President song. And her husband, Carrie Hart, basically put out a warning that looters who are trying to take advantage of the California wildfire victims will be shot on sight. Apparently, he's urging other Californians to avail themselves of their Second Amendment rights and stand strong with him. And Hart wrote on Instagram on Tuesday, "It's unfortunate that some people take advantage of others in a crisis," which is true. While the Malibu fires have been burning, some locals have been fighting off and defending their properties against the fires. There have been sightings of looters breaking into homes. Well, if you are a looter, think twice. If you are heading back into Malibu, the message there is pretty simple. Looters will be shot. Survivors will be shot again. But of course, that being California, the gun grabbers went totally ballistic. Oh my goodness, he's out there suggesting the use of firearms. Really? Well, how would you stop somebody from looting your home? It's one of the things about liberals. They have all these things they want. We want the guns to go away. Okay, what do you do when a rapist breaks into your house? I don't know. So, anyway. Speaking of guns, Nancy Pelosi, who is already out there drooling over the House speakership, is saying that gun confiscation will be a priority. And that it will be a priority to get the guns. The Democrats, the communists, and the socialists in the House of Representatives, they want the guns. They don't think you, the American people, should have any firearms. Of course, they've all got guns. They've all got armed security guards. They just want that pesky Second Amendment to go away. Because after you are disarmed, then they could come after more of your money and interfere with more of your lives. And interestingly enough, the current Congress is already trying to ram through another gun control bill. During the lame duck session, House Resolution 7115 was introduced and sponsored by New Jersey Representative Frank Pallone, co-sponsored by 16 other House Democrats. Now, the bill has been laughably misnamed as the 3D Firearms Prohibition Act because the bill does absolutely nothing regarding 3D printed firearms. Maybe somebody realized that there just isn't anything you can do about those. So the stated purpose of the bill is to prohibit the sale, acquisition, distribution, and commerce or import into the United States of certain firearm receiver castings or blanks, assault weapon parts kits, and machine gun parts, and the marketing or advertising of such castings or blanks and kits on any medium of electronic communication, to require homemade firearms to have serial numbers, and for other purposes. And heaven alone knows what is hidden inside the "for other purposes." So what's really going on here, this is a bill to ban the 80% partial firearm receivers that people can complete at home with the use of a few specific tools, as well as some additional parts. And it's typically sold as a kit, and you can produce a functioning semi-automatic sporting rifle. And by the way, none of these mass shootings that the gun grabbers like to wave at us has involved a kit-built AR-15. The guns are either stolen or legally bought at a gun store. The gun hobbyists, the ones who want to build the gun, they're not a problem. They're not the threat. I mean, if you think about how long it takes to build a gun anyway, as opposed to somebody flipping out on his antidepressants and going to the gun cabinet and heading on out. Okay, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And sort of to remind everybody why Nancy Pelosi and the gun grabbers are wrong, there's a report out of KTBS TV of an incident that took place at a liquor store in Cullen, Louisiana, where this store manager, a young lady named Sahim Hassan, basically was working there at 10 p.m. Two suspects barged into the store and put a gun in her face. And she stood up to them. She ripped the bandana off of one of their faces, and then when turned around and went after the guy who was heading for the register, got her gun and started firing at them. One of the burglars shot her in the leg, minor injury. She shot them. The cops have arrested them. They're going to go to jail. It was all captured on the store's security video. This is why we have a Second Amendment. There are criminals out there, and the police are not doing anything about it. The government's doing nothing about it. We have an inherent natural right to self-defense. And apparently over at Hortonville-based Ben Shot, one of their co-owners, Ben Wolfgram, thinks the same thing. And they're getting ready to come up Christmas season. They want to have Christmas gifts for the company employees. And the company produces glassware embedded with bullets. And they have decided as a policy that they're going to give every employee a handgun as a Christmas present this year. And apparently this father-son business started in 2015 in a small garage workshop, and it really took off because everybody likes to have these little shot glasses with a real bullet in them. And I think I told you the other day of why they call it a shot. So they have done very, very well for themselves. Wolfgram has given guns. This is the first time he's handing out guns as gifts. And everybody thinks it's a really good idea. There are a couple of employees who are saying they might like to have something else. And Ben is saying, that's fine. We'll find something else for you. And of course, before the guns are being given out, all the employees are being put through a gun safety course. And once these two employees get a chance to actually fire a gun, they may change their minds. Because I've seen that happen way back when I lived in Southern California, and I was building black powder guns. And we'd be up in the San Gabriel Mountains, Chileo, and there'd be people there who were shooting, and there were people there, just family members, keeping them company who were non-shooters, and they just sort of look askance at the gun. Say, you know, give it a try. It doesn't have much of a kick. It only fires once. Nothing can go wrong. And you let it fire a gun a couple of times, and yeah, all of a sudden they begin to understand, yeah, this isn't evil. This isn't bad. It's a tool. Now, this next story, and it's been all over the corporate media, and I find this absolutely disgusting. And this goes back to this Kate McClure and her boyfriend, Mark D'Amico, of Bordentown, New Jersey. And last year, they came on out with this story about this homeless man who gave Kate his last 20 bucks when she ran out of gas. And so that Kate McClure and Mark D'Amico set up a GoFundMe page for the benefit of Johnny Bobbitt. So far, so good. Their original goal was $10,000, but more than 14,000 people donated, and it raised something like $400,000. And that's when it all fell apart because everybody got greedy. And the first part of the scandal was when Kate McClure and her boyfriend Mark D'Amico were not sharing any of the money with Johnny Bobbitt. He got himself a lawyer to work on contingency. Kate and Mark said they couldn't give him the money. He would abuse it on drugs. Well, it just got a little bit weirder because it turns out that Kate McClure and Mark D'Amico and Johnny Bobbitt working together just came up with this out of thin air. They just made it up. It's a scam. Just Kate and Mark said, we got to find this homeless man. The homeless man will work with us, and we'll make a few $1,000s. And then they had 400,000 come on in, and everybody got greedy, and that is when it fell apart. I can't even imagine what $400,000 must be like. Okay. Sorry, I had some ice in that last swallow here. Now, down in Florida, interesting little development in the case here. Cesar Sayoc is the man accused of sending pipe bombs to prominent critics of President Donald Trump. He has now pled not guilty to the charges, which carry a potential penalty of life in prison. So the trial date has been set for July 15th of next year. The judge was trying to get earlier dates, but Sayok's attorney said they needed more time to prepare given the amount of discovery in the case and a lack of staffing at the Federal Public Defender's Office of New York. They're saying this is a slightly more complex case than the average one, and that's absolutely true. Here's where it gets complicated. If there was really no explosive filler in those pipes, then they were not pipe bombs. This is going to get really, really interesting before it's over. We know those bombs were a joke. They absolutely were. I'm not surprised he's pleading not guilty. I'm surprised they let him get away with that. And there we are. All right, so let's talk a little bit about computers. There's a lot going on there. There is a case going on in New Hampshire where apparently there is a murder trial going on, and the judge in the case appears ready to demand that Amazon turn over all recordings from the home where these two women were allegedly stabbed to death by Timothy Rivero. Rivero is pleading not guilty. And this appears to be the first case in which the state of New Hampshire where a judge is willing to summon data from a smart device, an Amazon Echo speaker, as evidence that could be central to a trial. Well, technically, I don't see any fault there. It would be like a tape recording or a video recording or a photographic evidence. Okay? Here is the issue that you need to keep in mind. This confirms that these home smart devices are in fact listening all the time. There's been a lot of resistance to people wanting these in their homes because they listen to us all the time. And Amazon, and for that matter Siri, have come on out saying, oh, no. They're only listening for that keyword that turns them on, and they're not listening or recording to anything else. Well, this case in New Hampshire may undermine that claim and show that in point of fact, we are being listened to all the time by these smart devices, primarily to build marketing data. And I wonder what would happen if I started talking about jelly donuts in front of my my smartwatch without saying the name to turn it on. If I'm going to start getting email advertising for jelly donut kits or something. Okay, 0-day exploits have been found in the iPhone X, the Samsung Galaxy S9, Xiaomi Mi6 phones. Now, this was the result of a mobile hacking competition held in Tokyo Tuesday and yesterday. And white hat hackers were demonstrating that even fully patched smartphones running the latest version from software can be hacked. And that included the 3 major flagship smartphones. So what needs to be done is to stop hacking and cybercrime from being a computer game and turn it back into being a criminal activity where you find the cyber criminals and you throw them in jail for a very, very long time. Cybercrime is exploding because cyber criminals are making huge amounts of money. Nobody's chasing them. Nobody's going after them. It's the perfect system for anybody with no moral core. Apparently, there have been additional Meltdown and Spectre vulnerabilities discovered affecting Intel, AMD, and ARM CPUs. Okay. Now, Microsoft finally got around to rolling out their October rollout, which had to be recalled because there was a bug that was deleting files. And so now they've released their October 2018 update version 1809, which has fixed the data deletion mess, but this still has this old mapped drives bug that's causing headaches for admins. Microsoft can't seem to get this stuff together. Either they need to hire more people, or they need to perhaps go the other direction and have fewer people who are more focused and embedded in what's going on. But clearly, Windows has become an operating system that is simply too obfuscated to really work well, which is why so many people are staying with Windows 7. So many people are still on Windows XP, and why so many people are moving to Linux. And I've been looking at some new Linux. Apparently there's one out there called Zorin Linux, which is very highly regarded, and actually allows you to run Windows programs on it. And I may take a look at that in my copious amounts of free time here. Here's a story, and this gets back sort of tangentially to what I was saying about cybercrime. This is from Blacklisted News. Companies keep losing your data because it doesn't cost them anything. Data breaches keep happening, they keep getting worse, and yet companies keep collecting our data in ever more invasive ways, subjecting it to ever longer retention and systematically underinvesting in security. Why is this happening? Because it's affordable. In 2014, Home Depot breached more than 50 million credit cards. 2 years later, in 2016, they paid less than 34 cents per customer in damages. Now, there are longer-term reputational costs associated with breaches, but these are not factored into the quarterly earnings-focused mindsets of corporate executives and strategists. And again, corporations are just being allowed to behave carelessly, recklessly, badly, whether it's vaccines, computers, software, data. They're not being held to account, and that is a hallmark of living in a fascist state, where fascism is corporate power and government power aligned together against the general population. Now, as you know, there's a lot of scammers on out there. And over at IsraelPalestineNews.org, they're running this story basically showing that French and Israeli media reported that a group largely made up of Israelis scammed 3,000 French citizens out of approximately $20 million. Most of that stolen money is now in Israel. But Israeli authorities are reportedly failing to cooperate with France to try and locate, prosecute the scammers, and retrieve the money. So Israel is basically, like I said, yeah, home of the scammer. As long as the money is pouring on in, we don't care. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And this next story may explain why governments are so inept at doing what they're supposed to be doing. Japan's new cybersecurity minister, Yoshitaka Sakurada, has basically admitted that he has never used a computer in his life. And his justification for continuing on as being the cybersecurity minister is that since he was 25 years old and independent, he has always instructed his staff and secretaries. He's never had to use a computer. And this is the guy who is now in charge of Japan's cybersecurity. See, one of the things that made the early United States great is the government was made up of people who knew how to do things. Yes, some of them were lawyers like Thomas Jefferson, but you had Ben Franklin, who was a publisher and inventor, Paul Revere, silversmith, George Washington ran a distillery. In fact, a lot of them did. It was a way of, preserving your agriculture. This being before the age of refrigeration. At the end of the year, when winter was coming on in, you would convert your agricultural produce into alcoholic products, which have a certain caloric count. But these were people who knew how to make things. Gunsmithing, construction. And today we have politicians, as illustrated by this Yoshitaka. They're in politics. They get these jobs. They don't know what they're doing. They absolutely do not know what they're doing. Remember some of the things that we've seen come out of our own Congress about how, the internet's plural, or it's really just like a bunch of tubes. It's really silly. All right, I need to get going here because we're running out of time and I got a lot to get through. Remember that swatting death out in California? Apparently there were these people playing Call of Duty online, and this Tyler Barris became involved in a dispute with other online video gamers, and he meant to direct the police to another player's home to swat him, but instead he gave out the wrong address to a Kansas-based father of two, and the police shot and killed him. So this Tyler Barris has now basically looking at 20 years in jail. Now, there's a big stink kicking on up between the New York Times and Facebook. In fact, Facebook seems to all of a sudden be getting into the gritty with a lot of people. And the New York Times put out this article of the methods Facebook and a public relations firm use to deny and deflect criticism. And of course, Facebook has come on back saying, no, we don't resort to those kind of underhanded tactics. And the report has led U.S. lawmakers to call for tighter regulation of social networks. All you need to do is declare social networks to be common carriers, just like the telephone lines, and all the problems are going to go away. Now, over at The Guardian, the writer Julia Ebner is basically railing against alternative tech, or the independent media, saying that most Gab and BitChute users are Nazis. Ooh, Nazis, Nazis, Nazis. That's the new N-word, by the way, if you weren't up on that. That's the N-word. Nazi, 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 Nazi. Apparently, Facebook has been caught aiding the police state by purging police accountability pages, or in fact, any page that shows where the police are behaving a little outside the law. Over at Apple, they've got some problems they're dealing with. Apple is admitting their touchscreens are failing on its $1,000 iPhone X just a year after it was released. Now, Apple says it will fix the problems for free. And apparently the hard drives on their MacBook Pro laptops are also having issues where users could lose their data. So if you are on a MacBook Pro, you should be doing regular backups. In fact, you should be doing regular backups anyway. In this era of shoddily made hardware and cybercrime, malware, and hackers, if you're not doing regular backups, you are just asking to have a very, very miserable time. Alrighty. Samsung is apparently coming out with a mysterious folding phone. It's going to be called the Galaxy F and will cost almost, well, it's going to cost a lot more than even the iPhone XS. About $1,400. This is an inside industry leak here. Apparently, Romania has extradited the hacker who claimed to have hacked Hillary Clinton's email account. So, Romania has conditionally released Guccifer. This was Guccifer. And it will be nice to hear what he has to say. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, not too long ago, the European Parliament voted through this controversial new copyright directive. Was called the... I had the name of it here. Anyway, the European Union Directive on Copyright in the Digital Single Market. That's its full name. Very long-winded, tells you it was come up with by a politician. There are two provisions within it that have been highly controversial. Article 11, called the link tax, and Article 13, called the meme ban, in which the concern is that people who are using copyrighted material to make a cartoon or something, even fragments of, portions of copyrighted material, could be in violation. Well, inevitably, the cyber criminals are already out there exploiting this, and the Dutch government's telecom agency has issued an alert saying that somebody is using their name to demand piracy fines. And it appears that people are receiving emails and being told that they have been found to be in violation of this EU law, and they need to send in a fine, or they'll be taken to court. We've seen that kind of extortion thing here as well. Okay, let's talk about health news here. Parents are now accusing the CDC of not reporting children's deaths from this polio-like acute flaccid myelitis. And more it's starting to look like that a lot of these illnesses that paralyze children and kill them, it's actually all one. And it keeps showing up again, and they can't cure it, they can't vaccinate against it, so they give it a new name. And so parents of children who had this polio-like illness are accusing the CDC of hiding the deaths of 2 children who suffered from the condition. And they're saying that by not publicly acknowledging the 2 deaths, the agency is intentionally downplaying the severity of this disease. It's a disease that paralyzes healthy children in a matter of mere hours. And the parents are saying, they're just sugarcoating this. It eliminates my trust in the CDC. Well, could very well be. Okay, this one was out of sequence. It was meant to go up above, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. When you're driving through the urban environment, you come to intersections. In many cities, you will see what are often called squeegee men or window washers. And these are supposedly homeless guys who have a water bottle and a squeegee, and they will very quickly wash off your windshield, and you in exchange will give them a couple of bucks. Well, you might want to look at them a little more closely the next time you see that happening, because apparently police officers are now posing as the squeegee boys in order to nab motorists using their cell phones, which more and more is being made illegal across this country. It's a $300 ticket here in Hawaii. And apparently the police aren't content with just, sitting up in a tall place with a binocular or just sitting in their car. They're actually out there, acting like homeless people, washing the windshields. The dead giveaway, though, is they always have a 2-way radio. Because after you drive off, they're going to report you to the police car down the way. That's pretty bad. Okay, health and safety news here. Sucralose. Concerns are being raised regarding studies that sucralose will generate cancerous tumors and it will fuel obesity. And if you read the slogan on a package of Splenda, it tells you that its main ingredient, sucralose, is made from sugar and tastes like sugar. But no, it isn't. It's made in a laboratory. It does not grow in nature. Sucralose is a synthetic compound manufactured through a chemical process. In other words, if it was sugar at one time, it isn't anymore. And apparently, one of the studies are saying significant dose-related increased incidence of bearing malignant cancer tumors. These synthetic foods, okay, they're loaded up with chemicals. They're not being tested. Apparently, there's a common painkiller prescribed to millions of people, diclofenac, marketed under the brand name Voltarol or Voltaren here in the U.S., can cause heart failure and irregular heartbeats. Apparently, it increases your risk of heart attack and stroke by 50%. Now, here's another story. This is over from Natural News. Apparently, there was a 22-year study done on humans by researchers at the Brigham and Women's Hospital at Harvard. And it documents, it confirms that aspartame is responsible for all kinds of serious health issues. Now, remember, aspartame, before it was legalized for human consumption as an artificial sweetener, it was classed as a biological weapon and an excitotoxin. But they just wanted to put it on out there, and because it's cheaper for them than any other solution, and making more money is basically what it's all about. But apparently it's another gift from Monsanto / Bayer. Okay, this next story is where we really get into it. Why are there so many dangerous medications out there in the American marketplace when we supposedly have the FDA? Well, that's because the FDA does not conduct its own safety testing. They rely on the pharmaceutical industries, who are, in theory, out there funding research in academia at various universities, and the researchers will write up a paper for a medical journal. It will be submitted, it will be published, and then the pharmaceutical industry will take a whole bunch of these, go to the FDA and say, see, these all prove this drug is safe and effective. Turns out that is a hoax. Drug companies routinely pay PR firms to ghostwrite clinical science papers, which are then published in medical journals and forwarded to the FDA to prove the drugs are safe and effective. There are medical journals out there who will want peer review. There are a lot of them who don't. Now, in 2009, around 14,000 women who developed breast cancer while taking Prempro, a hormone replacement therapy drug, sued the drug's manufacturer, Wyeth. And in court, it turned out that many of the medical research papers supporting Prempro had been ghostwritten by a commercial medical communications company called Design Right, whose website boasted that over 12 years they had planned, created, or managed hundreds of advisory boards, 1,000 abstracts and posters, 500 clinical papers, over 10,000 Speakers Bureau programs, over 200 satellite symposia, 60 international programs, dozens of websites, and a broad array of ancillary printed and electronic materials. And it basically turned out that Design Right had organized this planned publication program for Prempro, consisting of bogus review articles, case reports, editorials, and commentaries, using the medical literature as a marketing tool. So that's why you've got to be very, very careful about what you're taking, or what the doctor wants you to take. And this is a classic horror story. Apparently, in the United Kingdom, Newcastle's Freeman Hospital tried to pioneer the use of a surgical robot that was tasked with repairing a patient's damaged heart valve. The idea of this robot being that it was actually much smaller relative to a surgeon's hands, and it could go into much narrower areas and do repair. So far, so good. But apparently this was the first time this robot was being used. It literally physically assaulted one of the other surgical room staff trying to conduct its surgery. And it then proceeded to do stitches into the patient's heart in a manner that physicians present described as not being in an organized fashion. So the situation just descended into total chaos, and the patient, retired music teacher and conductor Stephen Pettit, lost his life. And here is where it really gets tragic. The lead surgeon, during a hearing into what had happened, what caused this catastrophe, the lead surgeon, Sakamaran Nair, admitted he lacked the proper experience in controlling and using the surgical robot, stating he was running before he could walk. Classic case of medical negligence and malpractice on steroids. As later revealed by the Daily Mail Online, Nair not only missed a critical training session in Paris that would have taught him how to properly use the robot, but he was also not present for other training sessions that took place at his own hospital, claiming he was busy with another surgery at the time. There were also supposed to be supervisory experts watching to make sure that nothing was going to go wrong, to pull the plug. Apparently, when things started to go wrong, they had walked on down to the hospital coffee shop and were having a latte. Okay. As you know, we just celebrated or commemorated the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. But there is another event where we are commemorating the 100th anniversary. And that is the so-called Spanish flu. And so we had this story that came on out there saying that the Spanish flu, first of all, wasn't from Spain. It emerged in a U.S. military base that was conducting experimental vaccine trials on soldiers. Now, this was just before World War I ended, and every country fighting in the war had been dealing with the problem that this being before the age of jet travel all over the world, soldiers were being sent into countries and exposed to diseases they had never encountered before, and they were coming down ill and unable to fight. So all the countries were engaged in this effort to try and come up with these magic vaccines that would keep the soldiers fighting. So they started testing this vaccine on these soldiers in the United States at Fort Riley, and then a lot of them were just immediately deployed to Europe. And because the conditions were less than hygiene and sanitary, they spread the disease before them. And in the end, the so-called Spanish flu killed 50 to 100 million people, including many soldiers. In fact, more people were killed by the so-called Spanish flu than by World War I itself. So why was it called the Spanish flu? Well, all of the countries involved in these wars, World War I, they knew something was going on. All of a sudden, there was this illness out there that had all the marks of a bacterial infection that was spreading out of control. But they didn't want that to get on out there, because it's hard enough to get young people to go on over to Europe and start shooting at Germans without them also thinking they stand a good chance of coming down with an illness and dying. So the media in all of the involved countries of World War I weren't reporting the story. But Spain did not take part in World War I. Their media was free from censorship, and they started reporting on this horrible epidemic that was spreading all across Europe. And so, always willing to scapegoat somebody that was willing to step up and sort of act like it's the blame. It started being called the Spanish flu. But there was nothing Spanish about it at all. It may have been this horrible vaccine experiment gone wrong. And we know it's happened before. But the corporate media is never going to say it, because the mantra is out there: vaccines save lives, which is going to sell more product than coming on out and say vaccine saves lives, except for that 100 million we killed off a while back. Getting on over to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, their Ebola outbreak is now the worst in the Congo's history. 319 cases, 198 dead. The disease is spreading. They're saying it's a very high risk. It will spread into Uganda because of the military conflict going on in the area. The borders cannot be controlled. There's violence in the area. People are going on back and forth. And all it's going to take is one of these people getting to a city with a major airport, and we're going to have a serious, serious problem on our hands. Okay, getting back on over to Monsanto/Bayer, they've been hit by a new wave of lawsuits over the Roundup weed killer. Apparently, 9,300 plaintiffs were pending at the end of October. And this was all of course, stimulated by that groundskeeper's lawsuit. And even though the judge has basically yanked out the teeth of that settlement, it has reminded everybody this is a dangerous chemical. The World Health Organization has declared it a probable carcinogen. And Monsanto, of course, they don't want to have to pay lawsuits. But Bayer is rejecting all the accusations. They're saying it's completely safe. It's completely safe. There's a wonderfully funny video out on YouTube where a spokesman for Monsanto is out there saying, you know, Roundup is perfectly safe. You could drink it like water. And somebody hands him a glass saying, that's glyphosate, bottoms up, and the guy hands it back, says, I'm not stupid. See, Monsanto's claim about glyphosate is that it affects an enzyme that is only found in plants. But the issue is there are other parts of the chemical that do affect human health. and it is just amazing that we live in a country where corporations are allowed to put on out bad, dangerous, ineffective products. The government is perfectly okay with it. There's an entire industry out there to basically support the sales of these products with bogus scientific studies. It's just insane here. Okay, we're coming up on our last commercial break of the day. When we come on back, we're going to be talking about human-caused global warming and the Pope. So we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, final segment of our program on this Thursday here. So let's talk about human-caused global warming. It is November, and apparently Houston, Texas got hit with their earliest ever snowfall. Earliest ever since records were being kept here. And again, people who are not on board with the carbon Nazi agenda or the rest, they're out there saying what's going on is we're seeing the effects of a decrease in solar activity. There have been virtually no sunspots at all this year, and solar activity is dropping to alarmingly low levels. And so our atmosphere has been cooling and shrinking, and we are heading for a long and bitterly cold winter. And of course, corporate media is still out there saying, oh yeah, human-caused global warming, got to pay a carbon tax, got to pay a carbon tax. Apparently it is now snowing in Shreveport, and that was a surprise for them. We have family in Tennessee. They got snow, and they never get snow before Thanksgiving. I'm dreaming of a white Thanksgiving. Anyway, and again, Dr. Tony Phillips over at NASA is out there saying, yeah, we're looking at one of the deepest solar minimums of the space age. So it's going to get there. NASA is now officially hopped off Al Gore's bandwagon, and they're saying, yes, it's a cooling trend. We're not seeing any warming. It is a cooling trend. And apparently it's a big one. It's a big one. Now, the co-author of this widely cited global warming study has owned up to a major math error uncovered 6 days after its October 31st publication by an independent scientist. And the study used a new method of measuring the ocean's absorption of heat and concluded through incorrect math that 60% more heat had been absorbed than previously thought. And I remember when this came on out and everybody was running around saying, oh, see, the reason we're not feeling the warming here on the surface, the heat is hiding out in the ocean. Here's the proof. Here's the proof. Well, unfortunately, a British-based researcher, Nicholas Lewis, published a comprehensive blog post claiming he found a major problem with the research and in particular the mathematics. And the author of the original study is coming out and saying, ooh, my bad, whoopsie. Remember the polar bear? The polar bear was the icon of the global warming movement. Oh, they're drowning, they're going extinct. Actually, right now, their numbers are so high, they're threatening the native Inuit populations. They've been taken off the endangered species list. Of course, the global warming people are saying, well, global warming is pushing the bears closer to humans, and it only looks like there's more of them. But you know, the Canadian government does actually do tracking of the bears. And again, it's what we get from the liberals. They're not interested in the facts and the data and the truth. They just want to push the agenda, the agenda, the agenda, the agenda. Okay, well, obviously, I didn't get to the end of my talking points despite a concerted effort to do so. So I'm going to have these coming into tomorrow as well. And again, a reminder, the Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3 of tomorrow's show. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of wonderful things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody. Keep everybody's focus on this out-of-control election system we have down in Florida and Georgia and New Mexico, Texas and Arizona and all these other places. It is a national disgrace. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to me. I've been a good boy this year, and we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.